Our next speaker is Coley Anderson, and she's from Registrar Corp. I know there was a question on going back to one of Audrey's slides, but we've actually got Coley here to give us really deep insight into FDA. So, yeah, Registrar Corp, I've known about them for many years. Helped us with some other programs and stuff as well in the past, and yeah, really are the key people to go to in the market for getting FDA registered. Very trusted, work very closely with USAID as well on programs and well respected by them. So a great knowledge in the industry as well. So just to give you a little bit of background on Coley. Coley, are you there? Can you turn your camera on?
I am here. Yes. Hold on. I as you were answering questions earlier, I just had to do everything to keep my mouth shut because I'm like, I know the answer to that. So I'm excited to talk and talk about that. But you go ahead, Rex.
Cool. Thanks, Coley. So just a little bit on Coley. She's the Director of Industry and Government Relations and Enterprise Solutions Specialist for Registrar Corp. Ms. Anderson focuses on educating foreign governments, trade associations, and individual companies about U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulations. In addition to English, she speaks fluent Spanish and has conducted dozens of seminars on US FDA food regulations in Latin America, Australia, Asia, and the United States. So, yeah, Coley is based at Registrar Corp in Hampton, at their headquarters in Hampton, Virginia. So she's coming live from Virginia today. And I'm going to then stop sharing my screen and hand over to her. She runs you through the requirements and registration process for FDA. Thank you, Coley.
Yes, thank you, Rex. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning on my side of the world. And I'm excited to be here because, it is my passion. The number one thing about Registrar Corp is we want to get your products from Africa onto the shelf in the United States. I mean, it is something where the US consumer is enamored with products from around the world. And so it's all about really understanding those regulations when, if we can just break it down and explain it, it really is achievable and you shouldn't be overwhelmed by it. I mean, the number one thing when I'm traveling around the world and I ask people, why are you not exporting? What holds you up? And the number one answer is FDA or US FDA regulations. So we want to jump in and look at these regulations. Let's break them down and not be fearful of them, but just understand them. So as an overview, we're going to talk about the FDA registration. I heard a little talk about that earlier. Prior notice, food canning establishment registrations, labeling requirements, Part C, food safety requirements, and then we'll take some questions and answers afterwards. So first of all, I want to say AGOA. I am, again, very passionate about that. I think it's a wonderful regulation that we've come up with to have duty-free access to the United States with your products. It gives you an opportunity to enter the market and be competitive. And so I want to commend, it's just a great program. So we want to participate in anything that deals with AGOA and also products outside of that, of course. And these are the eligible countries for AGOA. And like I said, in the past, pre-COVID, I had traveled all over Southern Africa and have spoken to companies, seen the product in their hands, gone to the manufacturing plants, and I come back to the United States and say, oh my gosh, there's so many great things, but it's about getting that product here. And one part of that is the logistics, but the other part is the basic FDA requirements. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the food facility registration, it's probably one of the simplest things to do, but it's become a little tricky. FDA says, you must register your company. And a lot of people who have brands, they'll say, oh, I don't manufacture process. They have a third-party manufacturer and they'll register their office because they are the company brand, but they're not really doing any of the touching the food at all or doing any of the manufacturing or processing. Let me advise, do not register unless you manufacture, you process, you pack, or you store food for animal or human consumption in the United States. You do not need to register if you're just the brand name. I know that's hard to imagine, but imagine this, the registration follows the food. There's so many people, I have this a lot in UK, I have this a lot really everywhere, where they say, well, I'm the company and my office is here in the city and I want to register my company. Again, this is for FDA to follow the food. So it's very frustrating when you register your office and there's no food there, and an FDA decides to do a surprise inspection and shows up in UK or Africa and there's no food. And you say, oh, well, we're the brand, we're not the company manufacturer. So please know, do not register unless your facility that you're putting that address in the registration manufactures, processes, packs, or stores food for animal or human consumption in the United States. So that is very important. The second thing I want to highlight is the U.S. agent. I heard a comment about U.S. agent. Now, that's a word that is a little tricky because there's several different types of agents. There's customs agents, there's brokers, there's agents, so business agents. When I say the U.S. agent, I'm being very specific to the persons whose name you're putting inside of your FTA registration. So we're not talking about your business partner. We're not talking about your customs broker. We're not talking about anything dealing with customs. We're talking about FDA. And your U.S. agent for your registration must go inside of your registration. So you're saying to FDA, when you put that name in there, hey, FDA, you're not going to call Africa if you have a question, but you're going to call my U.S. agent. And my U.S. agent is going to be knowledgeable about my product and know that I'm FDA compliant. So understand that when you register your facility, you have to also put in a U.S. agent. And that U.S. agent does not have to be your business partner, does not have to be your custom broker, does not have to be your importer. Now, it could be any of those people. It has to be a warm body in the United States that FDA can pick up the phone and call and ask questions about your product. Now, be careful in the fact that when you choose your U.S. agent, you want to choose somebody that's knowledgeable. It's almost like choosing somebody to represent you with your taxes to the IRS in the United States. You want someone that's not going to open their mouth and get you in trouble. So when you choose your agent, and Registrar Corp does this, we act as U.S. agent to over 30,000 companies around the world, because these companies trust us that when we open our mouth, when FDA calls and says, hey, we have a question about this product in South Africa or in Botswana or Malawi or wherever, we can answer confidently, yes, they are registered. What would you like to know? Another thing about the registration is that you have to renew this registration every 2 years. Super important. Also know that when you register your facility, you're opening yourself up to inspection. So if you're not ready for the FDA to come visit you, don't register yet, and don't ship your product yet. I mean, you have to register if you're shipping and doing business with the United States, but understand the moment you register your facility, you've opened the door to say to FDA, come anytime. Which takes me back to the original statement, do not register your office, because they will arrive and be very peeved that they've come all this way and there's no food at your office. So please register the facility that is manufacturing, processing, and packaging. Now, another thing that came up before, it used to be that you'd register your facility, you were done, one and done. Then FDA changed it and said, well, there's no allowance for updates. So then they said every 2.5 years. So they've done that. And then the next thing that they changed it to, it says every facility should have a unique facility identifier. Now, what is that? What is a unique facility identifier? You cannot have a valid registration now. This is new, guys. This is within the last year. You cannot have a valid registration with the FDA without putting your U.S. agent in there. And then you also have to put your UFI number in there. Now, where do you get your UFI number? As it states here, Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet is the only acceptable number currently that FDA will accept as a unique facility identifier that you have to put in this registration. So when you go to register and you sit down to your computer and you say, I'm ready to register with FDA, you can go directly with the FDA, or you can go through someone like us, Registrar Corp, and we'll help you through the process. But if you go directly with FDA, you're going to have that unique facility identifier. You're going to have your U.S. agent, and you have to be ready to put all that into the registration. And if you don't have it, you can't complete it. So please note that often it's very helpful when you have someone like ourselves, Registrar Corp, to assist. Now, again, I cannot stress, every 2 years on the even number year, you must renew this registration. And you would be so surprised. Companies get busy. The person in the company that's babysitting that registration leaves or goes to another company, and someone forgets to renew the registration. So you have to renew that registration December, before the even numbered year, because by January or February, FDA will cancel your registration. Your food will be out on the water coming to the United States and it will be canceled. So please remember, every 2 years on the even numbered year, you must renew your registration. That takes place easily December, the month before the new year. So you want to get that done. Now, there's some exemptions for registration. If you're a trading company, you're not touching the food. And, the exemptions are clear and they make sense when you understand, again, the purpose of the registration. The purpose of the registration is to follow the food. So if you're a trading company bartering and doing trading and you're just making deals, you're never touching the food, so they don't need to register. Personal residents don't register. Transportation only. Farms, they do register only if they're processing on the farm. If you're just a farm grower, you don't register. If you grow and then package and process that food, you register because now you become a processing facility. But if you're just a grower, you do not register with FDA. Retail food establishments, by the time that food reaches the retail food establishments, all sealed up, there's no possibility for contamination, adulteration, so they don't register. They're just putting the food on the shelf. Fishing vessels don't. USDA regulated facilities do not. Now, another requirement, prior notice. So many times shipments were arriving to the US port and nobody knew what was in them. So now FDA has come up, and this has been many years now, this is not new, but just needs to be highlighted because it can be skipped sometimes to some of our new exporters. Prior notice gives notification to FDA. My product's coming. What is my product? And so therefore it allows them to take that information and determine whether or not there may be a need for further inspection. Now, what they base that further inspection need on is, okay, is this a new exporter? Is this a high-risk food? Does this importer or exporter have a reputation for shipping products that have problems in the United States? So does the country have an issue with this particular product? And so FDA takes all of that into account. And when you fill out that prior notice, and usually your custom broker will do it or your importer will do it, you can do it as well. But the bottom line is, once it's done, it allows FDA to analyze that data and decide whether or not your shipment's going to be further inspected. Now, depending on how your shipment arrives to the United States depends on the amount of notice you need to give FDA that your product's coming. So as you can see here by road, coming from Mexico into the United States, you only need to give them 2 hours, 4 hours by rail, 4 hours by air, 8 hours by water. And before the food is shipped internationally, which applies to you, you need to get that prior notice done. And again, it allows FDA to analyze all of this. Now, we've talked about the normal registration. If you manufacture, process, package, or store food for animal or human consumption in the United States, you must register your facility. But there's another registration. It's called the Food Canning Establishment Registration and Submission Identifier. Now, that sounds like a lot of words, but really what it boils down to are products that look like this. If your products are in a jar, a can, or a Tetra Pak. Now, this is not the only qualifier, but this is a big red flag that quite possibly your product needs an additional registration. And FDA says you have to do this because these products are high risk, botulism. If not cooked properly, sealed properly, these products can be deadly. And so therefore, they think it requires just a little bit more attention than just the average registration. Because imagine, most people tell me, oh, I'm FDA approved, here's my registration. Registration is not an approval. Registration is just a notification to FDA that we're doing business and we're manufacturing a product that will be sold in the United States. So because registration is not an approval, they need to analyze products like this, very high-risk products like this, further. So that's the Food Canning Establishment Registration, known as FCE. And I always tell people, know the buzzwords, because when you're talking to importers, they're going to, say these words to you and you need to understand them. So if you have a product that is, and here we're looking at the pH level and the water activity, that's the final indicator whether or not your product is. The big red flag is can, Tetra Pak, jar, but then we go further and look at the pH balance and the water activity. And if you meet those levels, then you require a Food Canning Establishment Registration. And this is super important because a lot of people will start shipping their food over to the United States and they have the registration, but they don't have the food canning establishment registration. And then boom, when it gets to the port, the FDA is looking for that FCE, that's what we call it, and there's no FCE number. Additionally, there's something called the submission identifier, and that is another tricky thing. So you can have 3 cans of different sizes. So first you have the facility is registered under the Food Canning Establishment Registration. Then you have the submission identifier, and that is with each size of can, you've submitted information to FDA that says we cooked this can at this temperature, we sealed it at this point, this is what we did. Because each can, based on its size, requires different cooking temperatures to make sure that it is safe to eat once sealed and then reopened. So this is the tricky part. People will register their facility, but they don't do their submission identifiers. And the submission identifiers are one by one by one, a submission to FDA, explaining your cooking process or your processing of this product. And if the size changes, you have a different submission identifier. So therefore, the regulation comes known as FCE SID, Food Canning Establishment Submission Identifier. So when you hear that your importer asks you, excuse me, do you have your FCE SID? You need to say yes or no based on, as you see on the screen, the final pH levels and the water activity. It's not just the can, the Tetra Pak, and the jar. Those are just big red flags. Someone once told me you can tell when something's FCE is when you take it off the shelf and open it, and then when you're done with it, you have to put it in the refrigerator. 9 times out of 10, that's an FCE SID product. Again, but it really does boil down to the pH balance and the water activity. So we have a link here that you can take down that is free of charge, and it will identify whether your products are subject to FCE SID. Again, super important to know those acronyms because you will be asked for them by your importer, and you should have them if it applies to your product. So if you're not sure, you can go to our FCE wizard and check it. The SID wizard down here below is just to verify if your submission identifier that you've requested from FDA for each of your product sizes have been approved, and the number is good because your importer will be checking that as well. Now, another big reason why products are delayed at the port in the United States, labeling. And I tell people this is probably, it seems complex, but it's the easiest thing to check. And so before you ship to the United States, have your labels checked. It's the easiest thing to catch at the port. It's visual. FDA can take a quick glance and be like, no. So I say before you ship, please check your labels. Have someone check your labels. It's worth the money of, whether it's $1,500, $800, $600, do it because it will be a lot better than having your product detained at the port and have to be reconditioned. I've had importers that have had products at the port that the labels were not correct and they were so wrong that FDA said, nope, it's not moving from this port. You have to re-sticker. We call it recondition the product. And so imagine you had to get people out there to stick stickers on stuff that's on a container. So better to do it before it leaves your country. Get it done. It's worth the investment in time and money to have someone check it with a discerning eye. Now, mandatory declaration, statement of identity. What is your product? Is it a cookie? Is it a cereal? So you'd be surprised. Something like that is left off. Your ingredients list and nutritional facts panel. All of those are things that are absolutely important. Now, in the United States, we went from old label to new label. FDA recognized, based on some of the health concerns in the United States, that we needed to change our label a little bit, change it around, and make sure that it was identifying and highlighting certain things. So as you see in the old label, the calories are super small. So when you go to the store to buy something, you're like, oh, I love these cookies. And you can't, if you don't have your bifocals on or whatever, you can't read the calories and you're buying like an 800 calorie cookie or a donut. So FDA wanted to really point out, hey, beware, this cookie is 230 calories or 800 calories, and there's in some cases 1,000. And so they made that big and bold so nobody had to struggle to get that information. And then if you further go down on the label, you'll see that on the left, it was total carbohydrates, 37 grams, that was it. Well, now on the right, it has total sugars under that dietary fiber. And the total sugars then break down into included sugars. Now, this is big, because I can't tell you how many trade shows I've been to where people have these wonderful, healthy juice drinks, and they're like, oh, yes, it's fresh juice. It's really great. It's, we're selling it here in the United States. And I see like 42 grams of sugar. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, 42 grams of sugar. Did you add any sugar to that? Or is that natural sugar? And they say, oh, no, it's all natural. Well, now you can't lie. Here you see that it says total sugars, but then it says included how many added sugars. So if they put any sweeteners in there, I want to know about it. FDA wants you to know about it. Is it a natural sweetener, a natural fruit from the fruit, or did they add some sugar in that product? And you want to know that. So FDA, again, highlights that there. And then it goes down, and they took off some items here where vitamin C. I guess we're all good with vitamin C in the United States, but we're a little deficient in potassium, vitamin D. So they wanted to highlight those things. They removed things and made the vitamin C voluntary. And so here you see, the point out where all of these changes have been made. And again, this seems like really simple. You think you could take a picture of this, slap it on your label, and be good to go. But font sizes, bar font sizes, the really meticulous things that are on this label can be missed. And if they're missed, your product is stopped at the port. So my best advisement to you is please have your label checked before shipping. Registrar Corp does that. You can have anybody do that. Please get that done. Now, another thing that changed on the labels was the reference customary consumed numbers, because the rack values. So the rack values are what FDA says a serving is. A serving of ice cream is a third of a cup. A serving of chips, a serving of whatever the product is. They changed all those rack values to say, you guys cannot say that a serving size of ice cream is 1/3 cup, because it's more than that. And we know that. And when you actually do the actual serving of what's customarily consumed in the United States in one serving, all of those calories go up, all of those sugars go up, and now your product looks pretty bad. Well, we need to show the Americans or the consumer what he is going to be eating if he eats the reference customarily consumed amount. So rack values have changed in the United States. Now, FDA recognizes the fact that there's different types of bottle sizes and container sizes. So the labels have to change, and you can't fit everything on the label. So here you see the different types of labels that are accepted in the United States based on your packaging size. Here it's just, the organic labeling for food organic. We always throw this slide in, and it's a USDA regulated label when you're talking about organic, but we put this here because it's important for you to know, based on the percentage of your ingredients being organic, what you can actually call your product. You can't say something's 100% organic if it's not 100%. And if it's only 70 to 95% organic ingredients, you can only use the phrase made with organic. So this is important to acknowledge that you have to be careful when you're trying to claim organic based on the percentage in your product. Okay, Food Safety Modernization Act. Biggest change in 70 years with the FDA. Now, nobody really says Food Safety Modernization Act. Everybody in the United States says FSMA. Okay, this is another buzzword that if you're exporting to the United States, you should know this word. I always tell people, if I'm an importer and you don't even know what FSMA is, then I'm concerned about your compliance level. You should know Food Safety Modernization Act. The acronym is FSMA. It was signed into law on January 4th, 2011, and it was an attempt to go from being reactive to food issues and challenges and illnesses to being preventive. The United States government said, FSMA, we're going to create some regulations. FSMA is the umbrella, the bag. And then inside that bag, we're going to have a bunch of regulations that are going to make us more preventive than reactive. And one of those regulations is the new food safety requirement, which is the United States HARP-C food safety plan. Now, people get this totally mixed up many times. They say, oh, I have HACCP. I said, I didn't say HACCP. We said HARP-C. HACCP is different than HARP-C. HACCP was a requirement and a food plan that was originally created for NASA engineers, because when that product went up into space, they had to make sure that it wasn't going to go bad and that it was packaged properly. So they had to really pay attention to the processing of the product and make sure that it was able to endure the time that it was in, out in space. So HACCP was created originally for NASA, and then it went on to seafood and juice. So in the United States, the only companies that have to have HACCP, really have to have HACCP, is seafood and juice companies. So FDA realized, we have a great food safety plan for our high-risk products like seafood and juice HACCP, seafood HACCP, but we don't have anything for the cookie maker, the cereal maker. How do we know that their products are equally compliant with FDA? We have no food safety plan for them. If you are a cookie maker or if you are a cereal maker, there was no food safety plan for you or required in the United States. I mean, you could do it of your own volition, have your HACCP plan, but you weren't required to have it in the United States by law. Now, I can't speak to what your buyers are expecting of you, but by law, you didn't have to have HACCP if you were a cookie or a cereal person. So FDA created the HARP-C plan, and the HARP-C plan is a little different than HACCP. One is hazard analysis and critical control points. And then as you see here, we have the hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. So this is different. And so I always tell people, get ready when you're shipping to the United States or planning to do business in the United States. You have a HACCP plan. 9 times out of 10, most foreign companies have a HACCP plan, but they don't have a HARP-C plan. And again, that if you look at the words here, hazard analysis and critical control points is HACCP, hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. Again, this regulation and this food safety plan is looking at being preventive and looking at all the points in your processing to focus on prevention and not being reactionary. So in these requirements, you have to have this food safety plan, but you also must have a qualified individual. So at any point in time, FDA comes to inspect your facility, you should be able to identify a qualified individual that knows everything about the processing of your product and has been a major contributor, if not the sole contributor, of your food safety plan. FDA expects to ring your doorbell, knock on your door, whatever it is at your warehouse or your facility and say, please show me your qualified individual. I would like to talk to them. So be ready for that. Don't say, what is a qualified individual? Because right off the bat, that says you are non-compliant. Now, there's some exemptions to this preventive controls food safety plan. Obviously, juice and seafood are exempt. They have the HACCP in the United States. It's quite rigorous, and FDA did not feel a need to duplicate or put more burden on them for reporting and plans. Alcoholic beverages, low risk, they're under TTB, so it's not necessary. Dietary supplements go under current good manufacturing practices. USDA products follow USDA regulations. Farms, if you're only a grower, you do not have to have a food safety plan. But don't worry, FDA came up with something for the farms. It's called the produce safety plan. Okay, so these are areas where you're either exempt or you have modified requirements. Okay, how does FDA enforce this? How do they know you have your food safety plan? They're not collecting it at the port. The HARP-C plan is not collected at the port. So they know, and we're going to talk about the importers' requirements, but the importers have a requirement called FSVP. And FSVP requires that they check things from you. So FDA can stop off in the importer's office, your importer's office, and check to see if he's collected your HARP-C food safety plan. They can also make the journey over to Africa to a foreign facility inspection. They can inspect at the port and then begin asking questions and then say, hey, we want more information. Send us your food safety plan. They can do an FDA warning letter on you. What are the consequences? Import alerts. If you have a shipment that's constantly having issues, or a product, or as a company, you have issues, then FDA will put you on what's called an import alert. And this is where all the ports of the United States can communicate. It goes on a big bulletin board. And it says, if this guy ships, please detain his product and do further inspection. Detention without physical examination. So this can happen. So you don't want to go on import alert. Now, it's important to understand your foreign supplier, the foreign supplier verification program called FSVP. This is the responsibility of your U.S. importer. And the only reason why you care about this is because you need to understand his expectation. What he's going to ask of you is important. It's all part of your readiness for the U.S. market. If you don't know what your buyer's going to want, then you won't be ready. Regulations are important on your side of the fence, but what does the U.S. importer need? The U.S. importer has to comply with the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, FSVP, another acronym that you should be very familiar with. FSVP is now a regulation that FDA said to the U.S. importer, hey, U.S. importer, it's because of you this food is entering the country, so do some due diligence. FDA cannot be at every facility. FDA cannot check everything coming in the port. Things would be very slow to get into the United States. So they put the burden on the U.S. importer. So now the importer must monitor their foreign suppliers. They must have a qualified individual that will review your food safety plan. Importers will expect your importer to ask you for the following: HACCP plans, process flow charts, product descriptions, labeling, label, and third-party audits. These are the type of things that they're going to ask from you. And they're going to ask from you for your HARP-C food safety plan. So be ready to give this information. So many times companies don't have their HARP-C food safety plan that the importer breaks it down into the components that they actually need that would normally be found in the food safety plan. So they go, okay, if I get his HACCP plan, his process flow chart, his product description, his label, and third-party audits, I can still do my homework, which is write the FSVP plan. FDA is saying you are responsible for confirming that the facility is compliant and that the product is compliant. Now, what is the importer monitoring you for? Guess what? FDA says to the importer, if you're bringing this food into the United States, check the third-party audits. But by law, they have to monitor if your FDA inspections are going well with FDA, if you have any warning letters on file, if you have any import alerts, import refusals, or recalls on your product. That's what the importer is monitoring by law. He has to check you for before he brings you into the country. So that's why I tell everybody, get it right the first time. Let's do the homework right the first time, get all A's, and have a great sheet. So when your importer has to monitor you and document that he's monitoring, then he is able to do that with little, fret, because you are all good. Now, how can we help you with all of these things? We talked about registration. We talked about U.S. agent. We talked about prior notice. We talked about labeling, low acid canned food. That was the FCESID. We talked about the food safety and the FSMA compliance services needs, where you have your FSMA things like your HARP-C plans, which is the food safety plan. We can help with all of that. I want to also point out, we talked about FSVP, and I want to go back to that for a quick second and say that that is the responsibility of the U.S. importer. But there are times when the foreign exporter is shipping to the United States and there is no U.S. importer, right? And that happens when you are shipping to a trade show. You don't have an importer. So in that case, and understand the regulation, the purpose of this regulation is to have your food checked and confirmed that your facility and your food are compliant before it reaches the United States. So if you don't have a U.S. importer to check you, who is checking you? FDA will not allow the foreign exporter to do this foreign supplier verification program on himself. So what happens is you have to hire, and this is another agent that gets confusing, an FSVP agent. So we talked about the U.S. agent in your registration, and then we now have another agent, which is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program agent. And that is the person that's going to review your food safety documents, make the assessment that you are compliant, write a report, sign it, and keep it on file in office. We do that as a company, a Foreign Supplier Verification Program agent. This is what's needed when you're shipping to trade shows. You have no U.S. importer. Who's checking your information? So remember, it's also important for you to understand the Foreign Supplier Verification Program so that you can understand your importer's expectations, but you'll also need to understand it because you may have to hire somebody in the case you don't have a U.S. importer. So again, we move on to our last slide, which is, again, we have solutions to help you. We believe at Registrar Corp not only doing a lot of your work for you if you pay us to do it, but we also believe in educating you. So while we do our work, we have online training where we say, hey, go take our online training so that you can one day take over this work and do it yourself. I know that sounds strange because we would lose business, but we really believe in empowering companies to manage their compliance. And we don't mind complimenting and assisting you with that. So now we're at the question and answers period, and I am done.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey. Great. So just having a look. There we go. Cool. Okay. So Audrey,
Coley.
oh, sorry. Jeez, that's bad.
Although I love Audrey, I loved your story, by the way. I think your journey and your export and your company is beautiful, and it's always good to have a story to tell like that in the United States. So I don't mind being identified with Audrey, but I am Coley.
No, that's my bad. Coley, yeah, we've got a few questions here. I'll start with them. Okay, so firstly, how do you know if your product is high risk?
Great question. So high risk products tend to be products that, like seafood is high risk. And if you're specifically addressing the FCE SID thing I talked about, it's not about being high risk there. That's about being your pH levels and your water activity. And FDA considers that a high risk product because it's in a can, a jar, Tetra Pak. Many years ago, people died from botulism because truly it is a problem if you don't cook it well enough, and I don't know the detail, I'm not a scientist, but in the processing of that product, if it's not done properly, when it's sealed, when it opened, people will die. So if you have products like that, seafood, you know how that goes bad. We all know. I think you can kind of generally guess some of the high risk products, but in that FCE SID scenario, it's really about the water activity and the pH balance in the container that it comes in.
Great. Why is ISO 22001 not for food, or for food not a requirement?
So I don't know audits. I can tell you that most foods in the United States, when it comes on the buyer side, not on the compliance side for FDA, but they accept GFSI audits. So FSSC 22000, SQF, BRC, these are the normal schemes. Now, if there's a 22001 and it's not food oriented, then I'm not going to know about it. But I can tell you the ones that are accepted are FSS 22000, SQF, and BRC. I always get all those mixed up, but yes.
A lot of acronyms.
Yeah, it is really, just stumble over them all.
Awesome. And Teresa's got a question here. FDA and cosmetic manufacturers, that's sort of focused around them. I think this is Teresa Moller, who heads up the South African Cosmetics Export Council. Is FDA required for cosmetics manufacturers on products like lip ice or lipsticks and things like that?
Great question. We have a whole team that handles that, but I can answer that question. Prior to this year, Teresa, there was no registrations for cosmetics for voluntary. But under the new MOCRA, so we have FSMA for food, 70-year change, and we have MOCRA for cosmetics. And that's a new umbrella regulation or requirement that says, guess what, cosmetics, starting in 2023, and I think it starts, I don't know the actual month that it starts. We have a whole team that's focused on that new regulation, but it does start this year, that it goes from voluntary registration for cosmetics to now mandatory. And I'm so happy about that because, obviously I use I use lotions and everything, and I couldn't believe that facilities did not have to register with FDA prior to this year. But this year, yes, Teresa, they will be registering. They're working on the portal, and I'm getting weekly updates from our team. So I'm not totally versed in that, but just be ready for that because that's coming. I mean, within the months, you will have to register.
And that's MOCRA, M-O-C-R-A.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's the Modernization of Cosmetic Act.
Yeah.
So
Cosmetic Regulations Act. Yes. Okay, great.
Lots of acronyms, Rex. Lots of I'm trying to keep them all up here.
In your experience, what are certain documents that seem to have tripped people up when they come over to you and wanting to get FDA? What's making people spend 2 years and other people take 5 years?
So It doesn't have to be that long. And I think what happens is if you don't have the efficiency of the support of a third party, and I know we want to save money and I know that it's costly. Trust me, I've dealt with companies that are mom and pops. I've dealt with the Walmarts. I've dealt with, all the different levels of companies. And what it really boils back down to is get it done right the first time. And it's going to be a little painful. It's like when you take your little medicine injection for the doctor. That initial prick hurts, but after it's done, the work is done. So I would say that to really start business in the United States, you have to have your food safety plan, your HARP-C food safety plan for the United States, not HACCP, but HARP-C. Now you can write that, your qualified individual on site can write that, or you can hire a third party to get it right and get it done. And something like that can cost you like $1,900. I mean, I'm just giving sticker prices. And then you have to have your labeling done correctly. So you get your label reviewed. That could be another $1,900. And then you have to register your facility. You can go directly with the FDA, but then you have to hire a US agent in order to make that registration happen. So somebody like us, you would hire. Something like that can cost you anywhere from $400 to $600. And I'm throwing out these numbers, and like I said, all of those are just sticker ballpark pricing, but to give you an idea. And then you have your registration, your labeling, your food safety plan. And then usually people want to do with some type of third-party audit on themselves. So they do a GFSI audit of some sort. I don't even know what that costs. So that's BRC, SQF, or FSSC 22,000. So once you've done all of that, you're ready to go. But the registration, literally, if you come to us and say, we need a registration, we've had people come to us for a registration and they have a shipment en route and it wasn't registered. We can get it registered within 24 to 48 hours. Registration is not an approval. So really all you're doing is submitting your information to FDA saying that we are going to do business. Now, one thing that now will complicate the registration, will take a little longer, is FDA saying you have to have that unique facility identifier, the UFI. So in that case, that could take 3 weeks. You're going to Dun & Bradstreet to get this number that verifies your address, your activities at that address. And so they have to do a little due diligence on their side. And they're backed up now because FDA just made this mandate that all of these companies around the world that have an FDA registration must have a UFI, which must come from Dun & Bradstreet. So you can imagine they're backed up. So we help companies with that whole registration process and package it all together and say, we'll take care of it. We'll get your DUNS number. We'll get your registration. We'll act as your US agent. It all is one-stop shop. But you can do this on your own, and you can go around and look for all these pieces and parts, put them together and get it done.
Yeah, awesome. Great.